I'm Mary Evelyn Arnold.
And I'm David McFarland.
Welcome to the First Congregational Church. It's great to see you here. Thanks for coming.
Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said this all quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes. Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be shamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels."
Does life imitate art, or does art imitate life? When I was a senior in high school, the play chosen that year was Jesus Christ Superstar. Now, there aren't a lot of female parts in Jesus Christ Superstar, so some had to be written in so that all the girls who needed solos could have solos. My part was as Jesus' sister, Sarah. I got to sing the song not from the play, but from the movie called Could We Start Again, Please? Initially, I didn't really know what the play was about, but it made me a little uncomfortable, this idea of doing a play about Jesus. I mean, it was called a rock opera, so that made it a little bit better, but still, a play about Jesus, kind of awkward. I was a church-going kid all my life. I considered myself a Christian, but did I want my entire high school class to know about it? Absolutely not. Once rehearsals got underway and I realized people were taking it seriously and no one was calling me a Jesus freak or pointing me out for being a Sunday school child, I relaxed, got into my part. When the play was up and running, something really unexpected happened for me. I felt for the first time in my life, 15, 16 years old, what it really felt like to be a follower of Jesus, like part of his group. And reliving the crucifixion night after night, it was powerful. Powerful in a way that I didn't know it could be. It was maybe my first real experience of collective grief. I know we were acting, but teenagers have a lot of emoting to do, and this created a space for that to happen, so the feelings were very real. And we kneeled and wailed and prayed, and it was like the actors and the audience were transported through a grief that transcended time and place. I think about that now, all these years later, during Lent, during Holy Week, tapping into that kind of collective grief. And some years, even though I wish I could avoid it, ultimately I'm really grateful to be a part of a sacred cycle that makes room for grieving. Not only the death of Jesus, but also the losses that accrue over time, year after year. Grieving in community, it unites us in a way that nothing else does. Remember 9 and 11. We don't have to know someone in order to mourn with them, but when we mourn with them, we find we have a connectedness to them. When we grieve together, we share a common experience, and all of a sudden the things that divide us are just gone. During these 5 weeks of Lent, we're exploring ways in which we as a nation, we as individuals, have healing work to do, healing in our own hearts before we do the mighty bridge building work ahead of us. And grief, it seems to me, is a really foundational component of our healing. More than 500,000 lives lost in the United States in the last year due to COVID-19. It's a staggering reality. How do we even begin to take in that kind of loss? How do we hold it? How do we allow our hearts to be open to it without completely falling apart? One way I think is to stop thinking about grief as one-dimensional. Grief doesn't have a particular way. It's got multiple faces, It can start with just a tiny flash of a thought, or you're in the grocery store and all of a sudden it's like a wave that crashes. It never really comes at a good time. There's no good time to deal with grief, but we have to be willing, I think, to receive it when it comes. Each week NPR does a little story about 2 or 3 of the people who have died due to COVID. And that's an opportunity, I think, to let the feelings wash over us. They won't hurt us. They will move through us. But that sort of ritualistic exercise of engaging grief, of practicing grief. Jamie Anderson writes, grief is just all the love that has no place to go. It's not something to fear. It's not something to avoid or push down. We get in trouble when we do that. I was reminded in a recent interview with Tracy Blackman, she's part of the UCC national staff, that grief isn't always about death. Grief is often about things we can't see. We can feel grief in the ground underneath our feet, for the death-dealing decisions we've made around the planet, around indigenous peoples, around the health of the land. We can feel that grief. Grief, we're experiencing it as we read this book together about caste. Grief that comes up around facing and confronting racism, around facing and confronting poverty, systemic injustice. That's grief we feel. So much has been collectively lost in these past 4 years. I think we've got to take some time to grieve those losses collectively in order to be healthy going forward. Think of grief as a spiritual or social discipline. We can learn to practice grief in the same way as we practice meditation or prayer, even protesting. Reverend Blackman invites us to recognize that the sites of moral anguish are also often sites of moral courage. From our grief emerges our courage to build something new. Rachel Naomi Remen, who's a doctor who has made a career out of listening to people's stories of grief and loss around cancer specifically. She writes that grieving allows us to heal, to remember with love rather than pain. It's a sorting process. One by one, you let go of the things that are gone and you mourn for them. One by one, you take hold of the things that have been a part of who you are and you build again. Stephanie played an incredible piece of music that allows us to feel the grief through the keys. When we had Pray Their Names out in front of the church, this powerful ritual that came with drumming on our own chests, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. When I found myself walking through the rows of hearts with my wife on one side and my daughter on another, the grief that came through me, it took me to my core. It was like generations of pain just moved through me, snotty, yucky, loud, tears just pouring out of me, and I felt cleansed. I was held by a ritual of respect and a sacred community that made it safe for me to grieve. We need places to grieve together. We don't have to grieve for the same thing. All we really have to do is be present so that others have space to grieve with us. If we're really training ourselves in this moment in time to see no strangers, then it doesn't matter if it's my child that's been lost or yours. I can share your pain. My mother that's been lost or yours. I can share your pain. My firestorm, your ice storm, I grieve with what you've lost. And out of that grief, we'll find the courage to rebuild, to heal. So this week, I just want to invite you to have the courage to reach out to someone, anyone, who you know is experiencing grief. Offer to sit together quietly. If you have to say something, let them know that they're not alone in their pain. You're not alone in your grief. I am with you. We all carry grief. It's impossible to live in this world without it. But our darkest moments of grief can become the threads that bind us together. Those we grieve with, those we sit with and weep with, are ultimately those we organize with and advocate for. May we befriend our grief in this holy season of Lent and walk together through the tears.